My father was a good, principled man. He believed in doing right by his family. He believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He did his best to be a man his kids could look up to. And for that, I'll always love him. But what he did with his dying breath, what he chose to do in the name of helping his only son, I still don't know how to feel about it. I understand the motivation behind it. I even appreciate it on some levels. But what it's done to me, how it shaped my life, I'll never be entirely comfortable with it. I guess I should provide a little background, but bear with me, I'm kind of doing this on a whim. I wish there was someone I could confide in, or some other meaningful outlet, but there just isn't. I've run out of people willing to listen to me, and those that do, they only ever tell me what they think I want to hear. But I know the truth. I've known bits and pieces of it for years. It's only recently that I learned the full story. But that story begins with my father and the less than ideal circumstances I came from. Years before I was born, my father fought to survive extreme poverty and a negligent mother. He says he never knew who his dad was. Apparently, he walked out on them when he was a baby. His mother, my grandmother, well, she just couldn't be bothered to be a parent. All she ever did was work odd hours, date asshole men, and pass out drunk on the couch. At one time, when my dad broke his arm after falling off his bike, she actually got mad at him, saying she had to cancel a hair appointment because of him. Needless to say, it was not a loving home. Most kids, they'd use that as an excuse to lash out at the world and everyone in it. But not my dad. He wanted to do the opposite. He wanted to be the kind of guy who would take care of others and do the right thing, even if it came at a huge personal cost. It all seems so noble and upstanding, but it's that last part that became a problem. At least for a while, it served my dad well. He graduated school a year early. He signed up for the military, served honorably for 5 years. Then he came home and went to college. There, he met my mother, a good, kind woman who was the exact opposite of my grandmother. They ended up getting married a year before they graduated, and they had me the year after. Life was good to them. It was good to us. I really had no bad memories in my childhood. My parents were always there for me, always loving me, always protecting me. But then, when I was 7 years old, everything started to go horribly, horribly wrong. At the time, my parents had been trying for another kid. They wanted me to have a sibling, or several. But then, on this one awful day, my mom goes to the doctor and finds out she's got a tumor. It's big, and it's on one of her ovaries. So that means they would have to cut it out. I remember seeing my dad cry for days on end, and I had never seen him cry to that point. But he didn't hide it from me. He never hid anything from me. He just said we'd be stronger for her, for each other, and we were going to be there to protect one another. He promised. But that was a promise he could not keep. My mother, she died during the surgery. The doctor said they did everything they could, and I believed them. Even the surgeon started crying when he saw my dad's reaction. Seeing this big, strong former Marine just collapse in a fit of tears, I think anyone would have broken down. My dad was never the same after that. He became a lot more protective. If someone hurt me, threatened me, or so much as grazed me while walking down the street, my dad would get very combative. Hell, one time he sucker punched a guy who knocked me to the ground trying to get on a bus before us. Even after the man apologized, my dad was only so understanding. And that protectiveness extended everywhere I went. If anyone gave me trouble in school, he did not take it lightly. One time when a kid my age stole my baseball glove as a joke, my dad grabbed him by the collar, held him up, and cussed him out in front of everyone. Then, when the kid's parents confronted him, actually, I'd rather not say how that played out. Now, I'm telling you all these stories because I need to make clear that my dad was really protective. He would literally do anything to keep me safe. And I loved him for that. I still do. I wish he wouldn't have taken it so damn far. Because shortly after I turned 14, it all went horribly wrong again. But this time, it was an accident. My dad had been working security at a chemical plant. One morning, a truck's tire blew out and some heavy drums fell off a rack and my dad was seriously injured. I really don't want to recall the details, but it was bad. I'm talking life-threateningly bad. His legs were crushed, his ribs were broken, and the chemicals burned over half his body. If that weren't bad enough, he got some sort of infection while at the hospital. It got to a point where the doctors only gave him a few weeks. Barely enough time for him to make arrangements. Barely enough time for me to say goodbye. That was so hard, having to watch my big, strong, bull of a man suffer like that. But before he passed, he said something to me. Something that ended up affecting the rest of my life. I'll always protect you. I promise. My dad passed away that night. I'm pretty sure I cried myself to sleep for the rest of the week. After that, I just tried to process it all. I knew my life would never be the same. Both my parents were dead, and I didn't have much family left. My dad still made sure that I had a home. My godparents, my dad's military buddy and his wife, agreed to take me into their home. And his life insurance even made sure I could go to college one day. If that were all he did for me, then I genuinely believe everything would have worked out. Yes, I would still be heartbroken, but I'd be okay at the very least. And I wouldn't be here right now, sharing this story. But that just wasn't enough for my dad. Even in death, he just had to keep his promise. How he did that? Well, this is where things get a little disturbing. I first noticed it shortly after I started high school. Now, I'm still a mess at the time, having lost both my parents. I didn't have great social skills either, so it was only a matter of time before I got on someone's nerves. This angry, meathead brute of a guy, Billy Hardy, roughed me up one day. Now, to be fair, it was kind of my fault. A friend of mine dared me to steal his gym shorts and throw them in the sink. It was dumb and stupid. So even when he caught me in the act, I didn't blame him when he punched me in the face. And that's why I never went to the principal about it. I thought after that, we were even. But then, the next day, Billy comes to school looking like he'd seen a ghost. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, and he had this weird mark on the back of his neck. And keep in mind, this guy's a wrestler. His leg is the size of my torso. He does not scare easily. So when he came up to me, looking so terrified and weak, I wasn't sure what to think. And when he apologized profusely to me, I was genuinely confused. And so were many others. Later that day, I got called to the counselor's office. Word got to him that something happened to Billy, and he wanted to question me about it. And after I told him about the prank I played on Billy, he threatened to suspend me too. And I gladly would have served that suspension. But it never even came to that. The next day, that same counselor called me back into his office and apologized profusely. I mean, he looked as awful as Billy did the day before. Pale face, trembling hands, and these strange marks on his body. He said he was so sorry that he threatened to suspend me. He even offered to suspend Billy instead. Now, I declined that offer, but this marked the beginning of a recurring pattern, one that would play out in many forms for many years to come. Now, whenever someone messed with me, annoyed me, or made me feel distressed in any way, something would happen to them. I didn't know what it was at the time. I just knew that by the next morning, when they approached me looking all pale and disheveled, they apologized profusely. But it never felt like they did so out of sincere regret. It was always done out of fear. Serious, palpable fear. Didn't matter if it happened to another student, a teacher, or even a disgruntled waiter at a restaurant. If they didn't treat me well, something or someone would hunt them down and convince them to apologize. This made for an interesting high school experience, to say the least. After a number of incidents like this, word got around. People became aware. Mess with me, and something terrible would happen to you. Naturally, that made everyone very awkward around me. I mean, sure, they would smile and treat me well, but I could see it in their eyes. They were afraid of me. But this wasn't your ordinary kind of fear. This was something unique. Teachers wouldn't dare give me a bad grade, no matter how poorly I did. Administrators wouldn't dare discipline me, even when I showed up late, left early, or accidentally brought a pocket knife to school. And then girls who were way out of my league just started throwing themselves at me. I mean, this girl I had a crush on who'd been dating a football player, one day she offered to be my prom date. She even offered to show up at my door bare-ass naked if I wanted. Now, this may sound like a teenager's dream come true, but trust me, it wasn't. There's only so many times you could see that raw terror in people's eyes, terror that you know you're the source of, and you just can't escape the truth. These people, they're not doing what they're doing because they want to. They're not even doing it because they like you. They're only doing it because they're afraid of you and afraid of what'll happen to them if they don't. And it did not stop after high school. It didn't stop when I went to college either. I mean, if anything, it got worse. Everyone I met, even people whose paths never crossed with mine before, they approached me with this same palpable fear. And no matter what I did, they would never stop walking on eggshells when they were around me. Eventually, it really started to get to me. Even though everyone was bending over backwards to accommodate me, making everything I did so easy and stress-free, I couldn't keep ignoring the dark truth behind it all. So I tried to look into what might be causing this. That ended up being an effort that spanned many years. And it proved a lot more difficult than I thought, because I couldn't just ask someone. Everyone was so afraid of me that they would just lie or tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. So I did attempt to go to therapy at one point. I even did so under a false name. But the therapist who treated me, after just one session, they became affected. And every session after that, they would just smile, say I was perfectly healthy, and they would even offer to write me prescriptions for any drug I wanted. Eventually, I felt like I hit a dead end. But then, one particular therapist finally managed to offer some insight, at least before that fear got to them. This woman mentioned something about the fear others showed in me, saying it matched what she saw in people who had been tortured in a very particular way. But this wasn't the kind of torture that involved sticks, needles, or car batteries. No, this was purely psychological. A way of really hurting someone without leaving any marks. But the goal was never to hurt them. The goal was to make them afraid, so meek and so utterly broken that they'd tell you anything. Granted, they didn't always tell you the truth, When you're that afraid, it's very hard to be that honest. And those were the therapist's words, not mine. And she ended up proving her own words. Because when I saw her later that week, I found out she too had been consumed by that same fear. She tried to backtrack on everything she said, but I believed I was finally onto something. So I started doing some research on my own. And that's what led me back to my dad, and what I believe to be the source of it all. While researching more about fear and how it's used to affect people, I actually came across this old folktale from Europe. Centuries ago, this sickly king wanted to protect his only son. So he made a deal with someone calling themselves the Dark Protector. He, it, or whatever it was, promised to protect the prince. And anyone who so much as irritated him would face his wrath. Whenever they would lay down to go to sleep, they'd feel it. They would feel this raw, punishing power of true fear and terror. And the protector claimed that this fear, imbued in all those who dared cross paths with this kid, would protect him. The problem is, the story ends with the prince being alone, miserable, and empty inside. And since nobody ever told him anything that might upset him, he didn't stand a chance when his kingdom got invaded and everything he loved was destroyed. Not gonna lie, when I first read that story, I got sick to my stomach. It had way too much in common with my situation. And the way it ended, that just made things a whole lot worse. But initially, I didn't take it too seriously. Because if this story was even remotely true, then that would mean my father must have made a similar deal. He, in his sickly state, sought to protect me, and if the Dark Protector offered him the same deal as he did the king, well, I know my father too well. Like I said before, there's nothing he wouldn't do to protect me. For a while, I still refused to believe it. Then, just last week, I decided to visit my father's grave. I don't entirely understand why I thought it would make a difference. But once I was there, I just stood over my dad's tombstone and I told him everything that had been happening. How everyone in school became afraid of me. How everyone I met became afraid of me. How my entire life is now defined by everyone being afraid of me. Sure, I have a dream job that pays me 6 figures to do nothing, all because the company is afraid, and sure, I can hook up with any woman I want, all because they're afraid of me. And sure, I can get preferential treatment everywhere I go, all because they're afraid of me. But you know that old mantra about whether it's better to be loved or feared? Well, I know the answer now. Because when everyone is afraid of you, how can they ever truly care about you, let alone love you? I felt so alone and broken at that moment. I think I even cussed my father's grave out for an hour straight. I kept demanding answers, knowing full well that I was talking to ghosts. I didn't expect an answer. And honestly, I didn't even want it. But then, on that cold, cloudy day, while standing over my father's grave, I got my answer. This dark, cloaked figure appeared behind me. I couldn't see him, but I swear I saw it in the reflection of my father's tombstone. It was big and powerful. The best way I could describe it is, if fear took the perfect form, this would be it. And in my ear, the Dark Protector whispered something to me. Something that ensured my life would never, ever escape this fear.
Your father made a promise. I'm to tell him keep it.